Chapter 9. Joe came to the outcropping of rocks where he had hidden before. Oriole was waiting for him on the topmost rock. He wasn't sure how long he had been gone, but he was grateful that Oriole had waited. Already the day had flown by, and in his unconscious state, not having a watch and being in a reality he had never experienced before, he truly had no idea what time it was. The days and nights seemed shorter here, or time ran faster. Joe wasn't sure, really, of anything.
They're all waiting, anxious to hear your report. Follow me.
Oriole flew off with an air of excitement. She was happy to have Joe return to her care unharmed. When they arrived at their makeshift camp, Hunter, who had been resting beneath a tree, jumped to his feet and ran quickly to Joe.
What did they say? Could you talk with them? You were gone a long time. You must have been able to communicate.
Obsidian, Soen, and Ariel were all drifting toward Joe, who picked some shade and sat down, waving off Hunter's repeated questions. Somehow, even in the daylight, Hunter's hideous look was softened and less intimidating, or Joe, having just come from the sea dragons, was getting used to having strange beasts around.
They rejected your proposal.
Joe said flatly, looking directly into Hunter's eyes.
And
Joe held up one of his arms to quell the rage he could see welling up in Hunter.
yes, because of their translator, we could communicate just fine.
They rejected our proposal?
Hunter almost shouted, his hands clenched as tightly as his long, sharp claws would allow.
First of all, there were only 2 sea dragons and 1 translator. They made a simple counter-proposal, which, in its essence, proposes no interactions with the werewolves. You would agree not to intrude on their territory, which they defined as those mountains all the way to the sea.
Joe pointed to the general from which he had arrived.
All other territories are yours.
What about them intruding on our territory?
Hunter shouted.
Will they honor our territory forever? No, they will keep migrating from the sea, and pretty soon they will need more land. In time, they will overtake our territories. It's inevitable. My children's children will be living under their culture, their rules and laws. That is unacceptable.
Hunter started pacing on 2 legs.
That is not a counter-proposal. That is a call to arms.
Soen spoke first.
You said there were only 2 sea dragons. Do they speak for all sea dragons?
Joe turned his attention to Soan, who seemed calm and composed.
The translator referred to these 2 sea dragons as Adam and Eve. They are the only ones of their species that can stay out of water and survive. They are something of a mutation. The others of their kind can only leave the water for short periods. That's what they said.
And you believe them?
Hunter asked, his words cutting the air.
Describe the translator.
Soen said, ignoring Hunter's rhetorical question. Joe paused for a moment, forming the picture of Alter in his imagination. So many details are missing.
She called herself a cervitaur, something I had never heard about. She was half animal. Her top half was like, well, in my world, we called them deer. The bottom was human. She had antlers coming for her head. She's about my height. She's quite beautiful.
Is she native to this planet?
Soen asked.
No, she's like us. She just popped in unplanned.
Soen replied, deep in thought.
This lends credence to our hypothesis that we are here for a purpose, perhaps to negotiate peace between the sea dragons and the werewolves.
His featureless head nodded unknowingly. A featureless face was a strange experience. They always seemed deep in thought or possibly asleep. Obsidian cleared his throat in a deep growl, demanding the attention of all present, even Hunter.
You were gone a long time. What you've told us is hardly anything other than they rejected the werewolves' proposal and made a counter-proposal, which seems equally absurd. What else did you talk about?
Hunter was not blind to the insult, but because it was made by Obsidian, he simply rolled his eyes and walked away a few meters.
Alter, she's the servitor.
Joe explained.
She's able to make herself invisible. When I was scouting their camp, she was speaking to me, and I couldn't see her, and then the next thing I knew, I woke up in a little hut.
They knocked you out?
Hunter asked, suddenly showing renewed interest in the conversation.
No. They have weapons of some kind that can mess with your orientation. It's like being stunned and then losing consciousness. I blacked out, and they somehow managed to move me to this hut. I have no idea for how long I was unconscious, but when I came to, I staggered from the hut, and there they were waiting for me. Our actual discussion was all of 10 minutes.
Joe reported, and then fell silent as if suddenly remembering he was tired.
Well, if it hadn't been for Oriel's insistence, I would have rescued you. Just so you know.
Obsidian nodded his massive head.
I just sensed you were okay.
Oriel offered.
I watched them move you to the hut. They were careful with you. I think it was their way of making introductions as easy as possible.
Humph.
Hunter grumbled.
They have ulterior motives in everything they do. They cannot be trusted. This interpreter is probably one of them in disguise.
They can shapeshift?
Oriel demanded.
That's the legend with servitors.
Hunter said.
Alter was genuine, kind, intelligent, insightful. She was not one of them. In fact, she said that they found her as repugnant as myself.
Joe smiled as he recollected the exchange. Hunter grunted a good distance away and then strode back into the circle.
Well, if nothing else, Joe has found a new friend and admirer. This is how they do it. They suck you in and get you to agree with them. We won't be so naive.
Hunter began to walk away once again.
Where are you going?
Oriel asked.
To commiserate with my tribe.
When will you be back?
A few minutes, why?
Your tribe? They're here?
Joe asked, suddenly alarmed.
Of course. They're as curious as I am. I will tell them what you said and see if they have any ideas for our next steps. But I should warn you, werewolves only need to eat once a week. Our last meal was 5 days ago. We get a little edgy as we get closer to mealtime.
He pointed to the sea dragon's camp.
And those creatures are very edible.
Go.
Soin said with a wave of his hand.
You would do well to remember that we are your best hope for peace, and we are decidedly not edible.
Hunter grunted under his breath, turned, and began to run on all fours, bounding into the surrounding forest. In a matter of seconds, he disappeared into the thick underbrush. Obsidian turned to Soin.
You know he's going to return with war in mind. If there's really only 2 of them, the sea dragons, what threat can they really be? Their counter seems entirely reasonable. They just need to add that they will not intrude on the werewolves' territory. Problem solved.
These matters are infinitely complex.
Soin said.
There is no simple solution, or we would not be here.
Joe cleared his throat.
I'll tell you this. Alter is real. She's as neutral as the 4 of us, and in many ways, she's in the exact same position as we are.
He paused, brushing his thick black hair out of his eyes.
The lack of trust between the werewolves and sea dragons is owned by both halves. Legends, myths, preconceptions, and fears of territorial disputes somewhere in the distant future. It's simply idiotic. They can't possibly find a common ground with all of their baggage.
Baggage carries things. It has a use.
Soin said.
But when you arrive at a destination, you have to unpack it. We need to help them unpack their baggage. Once it is unpacked, we need them to see what was packed inside the other's baggage. Just to see it, not debate its validity for being an article inside the bag, but to see it. The seeing is enough. Perhaps it won't change anything right away, but it will gain a foothold inside their collective mind. It will change them, maybe not all, but those who open their eyes and see, they will change.
And you believe you can do this?
Obsidian asked.
I believe we can do this. If it were just me, why would you be here?
There was a long silence. A distant cackling suddenly arose from a part of the forest not far away.
Sounds like they didn't like what they heard.
Obsidian remarked. Joe turned to Soin, his eyes tired, but there was something on his mind that couldn't wait another second.
You make a lot of assumptions that we can play a role in the making of their piece. What about ours? Are you suggesting that there's some puppeteer who sulks invisibly behind curtains and positions us like pawns on some cosmic chessboard? And we have nothing to say about it?
Everything is synchronicity because everything is of one nature.
Soin replied.
One thing cannot move, think, feel, or speak without another thing in response. This is nature, the thing that is everything. There's no puppeteer any more than we are puppets. There is one being of infinite scale, and then there is nature in its manifest parts. The one being of infinite scale is inside nature.
They paused, their head tilting the tiniest of degrees.
It is nature's mind, body, and heart, contained with spacetime, and spacetime is where we, the infinite learners, learn for the sake of the one being of infinite scale. It is not a game of us and them. It never has been, nor can it even be. It is a grand experiment of infinite scale and unknown purpose perpetrated by one being through nature.
Soin paused for several seconds, holding their posture like a statue. Perhaps they were expecting a question or remark. Hearing none, they continued.
Yes, we move upon the cosmic chessboard, but it is not a hand that moves us. It is an honor. It is a privilege. It is a partnership. It is an intelligence that is all and, therefore, not separate. If you see it as something that encumbers, constrains, or manipulates you, then you are not cognizant of synchronicity and its expression of the one mind of the one being.
That's a lot of words,
Obsidian remarked.
and none of them answer how we got here or why.
Soin ignored Obsidian's comment and instead turned to Joe.
You do see how the reality around you leads you.
Joe shook his head, his expression clouded with disillusionment.
What I see is a reality that feels unreal, leading me down a path obscured by illusion. It's hardly comforting. Instead, it leaves me feeling utterly helpless, adrift in a world where everything and everyone seems equally powerless. And this vast mechanism, akin to a cosmic juggernaut, churns on relentlessly, devoid of any semblance of mind or purpose. It's not guidance. It's akin to being a mere flea clinging to the back of a dragon.
Ah, yes.
Came the sage response, resonating with a depth of understanding.
In times of hardship, when the weight of existence becomes almost unbearable, the reality shaped by illusion often supplants the profound synchronicity that underpins the fabric of existence.
Why is that?
Joe retorted, his tone laced with skepticism.
It's a matter of where we choose to focus our attention.
Came the measured reply.
If we seek out synchronicity and embrace the profound interconnectedness inherent in the one being of infinite scale, then that becomes our reality. Conversely, if we fixate on the illusory constructs of space and time, we are bound to experience a vastly different reality. And which reality do you believe holds the key to experiencing the profound synchronicities that affirm our connection to the one being of infinite scale?
The question hung in the air, as if there was no gravity.
That requires a whole lot of faith and effort to reinterpret my reality. And that's really what you're suggesting, a complete reinterpretation of my reality. And what if my reality was in the worst condition you could imagine? How do I suddenly view synchronicity occurring all around me, extracting me from the mud and setting me down on the mountaintop? How does that happen? Maybe in your world, no one is in the mud, where it's dark. You can't see. Anything but life happening to you as a grinder happens to a piece of scrap metal rusted and brittle. It's not real.
Their conversation was cut short by Hunter's return, who brought two others with him. The new werewolves followed a few meters behind Hunter, forming a triangle shape as they moved toward the group.
We have a plan.
Hunter announced.
Does it involve us?
Obsidian asked matter-of-factly. Hunter nodded and then shook his head.
We've never seen or met the sea dragons, translator. You called her a servitor. We do know about servitors from our legends, but only from our legends. They were always considered highly intelligent. Some of our kind even looked upon them as gods. Our race has reverence for them, and because of this, we want to meet her, the translator of the sea dragons. We will meet only with her and Joe. No sea dragons. Agreed?
Obsidian turned to Joe.
Can you invite her to such a meeting?
I can try, it might work.
Then we are agreed to at least try,
Soin replied.
When?
Joe asked.
Hunter turned and looked at the two other werewolves who stood behind him. He spoke in a language that none of the four could understand.
You have a separate language?
Joe whispered, but loud enough for the others to hear.
We will be ready at dusk. We will start a fire.
He glanced up at Obsidian.
With some help from your friend, of course.
Then Oriel and I will go to those outcroppings by the beach where I first met Alter.
He turned to Oriel.
Ready?
She nodded and flew off in the direction of the beach. Joe followed at a slow running pace. The werewolves watched, and one of them turned to the other.
Such slow creatures. How have they survived? Evolution must have made a compensation of some kind. I just don't see it.
The other smiled.
Well, perhaps their taste makes up for their lack of speed.
They both chuckled under their breath. Hunter only turned around to smile.